What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel for an interview that I'm very excited about right now because I can't believe I'm saying this. We're celebrating the 10th anniversary of The Purge with the Purge franchise creator, James DeMonaco. How is it 10 years already?
I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me either.
I vividly remember seeing that movie in the Angelica of all places.
Really?
The very first time. Yeah.
The irony of that is that we just, I never thought it would play in any multiplex across the country when I wrote it, because I came up with the 20 years. The idea, this franchise is 10 years old, but the idea of the movie is 20 years old. And when it was conceived, we thought it would just play at the Angelica. That was it. We thought it would be this tiny indie horror thriller. And I didn't think it had any mainstream appeal. We had over 80, I think we counted 80 passes because the script was so anti-American. So we just assumed if we do get it made, it's going to play in a very small venue like the Angelica, which was my favorite theater when I went to NYU. And so, so you seeing it there is kind of oddly ironic in a weird way.
Now, because I'm curious, has anyone who passed on the original script, have you reconnected with anyone and gotten their thoughts on the growth of the franchise? Yeah,
I spoke to the one person years ago. My producer actually spoke to Luc Besson had passed because he financed my first film. And Luc expressed some regret that his people, I don't know if he says he saw it or his people passed on it, but we sent it to Luc first because he had financed Staten Island, New York, which I directed in 2007. So yeah, his pass, I think, was the one we heard. And I think a couple other companies might have said something to me. I can't remember now. There's so many that it was just everybody was passing. Until Jason saw something, that was what changed the kind of trajectory of the project.
Jason knows a thing or two about
yes, he does.
Mr. Blum knows. Franchise.
Yeah, exactly.
So you wrote the script quite a long time ago at this point, but I am curious if you remember this. What would you say is the biggest difference between draft one of the screenplay and what we now have in the final film?
Oh, absolutely. I think draft one would have been X-rated because of its violence. So my producing partner, Sebastian Mercier, who produced along with Jason, before I show anyone what I write, I go through Sebastian's intense process. And so he brought it down to violence. I was really trying to do this discourse on violence, and it was a big metaphor for lack of gun control laws in America. So I was pushing the envelope deeply. So that got taken down. And the Ethan Hawke, James Sandon character he didn't just sell security systems, because I wanted it to be a morality play. He actually, this is the big thing that we cut. We put it in part 2 a little bit. He purged someone in the basement as a ritual every year. He bought someone, and to purge his own, as the societal catharsis that the purge is promised to be, that'll make you a better person. He bought fully into this propaganda and kills a man on page 25. That's the first purge of the movie. And that's probably the only real note that we got from Universal, is they thought that was the compromise. It was kind of, they thought the morality play was in the DNA of the piece without seeing Ethan's character, James Sandon, kill a man. The fact that he sold security systems, they thought that he was making a profit off the purge was enough to show the economic benefit to his family, and that he was buying into the propaganda of the holiday. So that was the big cut that affected. And then we put it in part 2. We kind of saw that where they buy. There's a man who gets bought. It's Carmen Ejogo's dad gets bought by a rich family, very similar to what we had in Purge 1.
Okay, I wanted to go back to the extreme violence that you cut back on, because on the one hand, it's not being able to do something you originally wanted to do, but by pulling back on the violence, is there any, I don't know, is there any stronger story element that you discovered by not having the film be as gore heavy as you originally intended?
Yeah, I think it was more of a vibe. I think having the audience imagine what's actually happening out there, I think it's sometimes more than we can do. And we were so limited on budget. So it was a lot of stuff, we're not even going to be able to do that. And so I think what we learned was that the audience's imagination would fill in the blanks. And that was a great lesson for me, even as a writer, more than even as a director, was sometimes I think, especially in the horror genre, letting the audience fill in the gaps could be more even scarier than what we perceive as let's show it all. And I've tried to learn that lesson. Even in my newest film, I've tried to say, okay, less might be more. And I think that was a great lesson. We should want to show it all. As a filmmaker, now let's shoot this, let's shoot that, let's put it all in there. We'll edit it out later if we don't need it. But, when you have such budgetary constraints, it forces you to work within a box and say, okay, what's important to tell the story? So I think it just, less is more was the big lesson there. If that's a boring answer, but
It's one of the most disturbing parts of all of my favorite horror movies is how my mind will spin out of control more so than if I were to be overtly shown the most horrific thing in the world.
Exactly. And I think that goes to various things, not just gore, but even story points. We don't have to tell everything. I think sometimes the writer in me wants to say, okay, well, let's explain it all. And I'm reading this amazing novel now by, I forgot the writer's name, who wrote Eyes Wide Shut. It's his experience while writing Eyes Wide Shut with Kubrick. And all Kubrick keeps telling him in every draft that comes in is just take it all out. We don't have to explain anything. And it's a fascinating thing. It's a fascinating thing, I think, because you get very worried that the audience is going to misunderstand some thought you had in your head that they want to spell out. So I think as I get older, I'm learning that the audience is way smarter than my worries are. So if that makes sense.
With that in mind, is there any reaction to the first Purge movie that, I don't know, surprised you? Whether it was like a plot detail that folks filled in on their own, or maybe something people had a really big reaction to that you didn't think would spark such a big response?
I think the biggest thing over the course of all the Purge films is that there's a portion of the audience, I don't think it's big, I pray it's not big, that doesn't see that I'm telling this morality play that the Purge is a very bad thing. And that's where it gets very strange. Some people see it as this odd wish fulfillment. We have, as you know, we do all these massive test screenings. We do 300 people. We test each movie 3 times. So we're looking at 900 written responses from the audience. And there is a portion of the audience that loves the idea of purging. And it's very scary. I wrote it as this horror. I hate guns. So I wrote it, to me, the scariest day in America could be a day where people legally could use guns. And so that was truly, and there was a big portion of the audience, and this was scary too, I guess, who said they would have never, and I kind of get this. On some level, I understand protecting your family, but a lot of people were like, there's no way when the young boy lets the homeless stranger into the home who's in jeopardy. I'd say half of that first test screening was like, no one would ever do, not just a little boy, but no one would ever let someone in on that night. And I got their argument, but I'm like, it's a little boy and he's caught in this complex moral structure of the Purge and what does it mean? And he sees a man struggling and screaming. He doesn't know, maybe it's a ruse, maybe it's not, but he's not thinking this way. He's just seeing a man in trouble. But there was an audience, a lot of the audience was like, no way anyone lets them in. So we battled with those things.
Yeah, I remember that discourse quite vividly. Yes. And also just, the initial reaction to a new high concept like this being like, well, what would you do on Purge night? Which, does kind of defeat the purpose of the whole franchise.
Exactly. What would you do? I always say I go to Canada, but that is the big question I get all the time. So
it does not surprise me to hear that, sadly. Going back to the big set pieces we actually do see in the final film, 10 years later, now looking back, is there any particular one that still makes you think like, damn, I cannot believe we were actually able to pull that off?
Oh my God. The whole movie, I feel that way. I look back now, we shot the whole thing in 18 days. We did a couple of days of additional shooting. But I look back and I think of Jacques Jouffret and myself, when we saw the first schedule come from our AD, we turned to each other and said, this is impossible. We can't shoot this movie in this time allotted. And I remember Jason was just, being Jason, a great producer, he's like, you could do it. You could do it. Just kept saying you could do it. And we did it. Somehow we did it. But whenever you get into action, I think that's where horror is one thing. Horror, doing a scare or something, you can create a mood. But when you do action, you have to get some coverage to it for the most part. And just the time restraints on the early Blumhouse films. Like they got better when the franchise grew, but God, it was very hard. So I didn't think any of it was possible.
The pool table scene is still one of my favorite fight scenes ever.
Oh, really? That's great. And the stunt people were amazing. We cast all stunt people to play the bad guys, the kids coming in, and they were just truly amazing. Yeah. So that we shot to give it, like, that's the kind of scene we had to shoot it in 4 hours. So we looked on paper and we're like, that's impossible. How are we doing this? So we had the most amazing stunt team. We pre-vised it, which was very important, which was, shooting some version of it on, cheaply with our iPhones beforehand. So we knew everything we were doing. So, pre-production becomes key in these things, as you know more than anybody. So yeah, that's, I'm happy you bring that scene up. I forgot that. That was almost impossible. We did it. Again, somehow we pulled it off. And listen, as the filmmaker, I still feel like we missed 100 shots, but I think it tells the story appropriately. So, but I look back on it, I'm like, I can't look at it. I'm like, oh, we missed this here, and this angle, and this lens. So it's anyway.
4 hours is blowing my mind right now.
4 hours, yeah. Could you imagine? And we did it even on Anarchy. We were doing stuff. We were out and about on the streets of LA night shooting like 6 to 6, 6 at night, 6 in the morning, and big action scenes we were doing in half a day. I still look back, I'm like, and I think we all kind of went mad because it was so intense, and night shoots, 30 days of nights. We were slowly going, like, we were all getting in that weird purge mindset. So very hard though. Anyway.
Night shoots will do that to you.
Exactly.
So speaking of your purgers in the first movie, one thing I've always wondered about, did you ever come up with any sort of backstory for Reese Wakefield's character? Just, I get the vibe that because of his wardrobe, maybe he's a college student, but even just, what put him on this path in life that he is someone who wholeheartedly embraces the purge like this?
No, it's a great question. I do character studies for every character, personal things. I try, see how much we need in the script. But for me, I need to know where everybody comes from. So you nailed it. He was a college kid. I think for me, the purge was passed down generationally from the parents buying into a certain government propaganda here, especially the rich, since this is kind of a caste system, rich versus poor, and the elimination of the disenfranchised in society ultimately becomes the big metaphor for the purge, so that the government doesn't have to economically take care of them. So we always thought, yes, college kid, frat boy, buying into the propaganda, probably from daddy who owns some big corporation, works on Wall Street or something like that. So without getting deeply into that, but it was that. You nailed it, Perri. I think and when we found that crest on his jacket, it kind of told that without having, again, it's better to show it than say it. So the crest, like you picked up on, this is a boy of privilege. This is a boy of wealth, buying into daddy's propaganda, mommy's propaganda, the government propaganda. So yeah, you nailed it. That was the backstory pretty much.
Then my next follow-up question to that, this is kind of a big convoluted idea, but why do you think James got involved in the purge the way he did versus purging like Reese Wakefield's character does? And then how does that impact his kids, that younger generation, where they're more open-minded to understanding why, like, the purge is bad and shouldn't be happening, whereas that middle generation, so to speak, in this situation, he is very much going down that bad path.
It's a great way to look. I was always looking at it like gun laws or lack of gun control laws, or what people feel about, especially in American society, about guns in general. You have people who own guns, who advocate for guns, that everybody needs a gun. And then I know people who don't have guns, but believe in the right to own, arms. So I always thought James fell into, I don't purge myself, yet the government has told me that this works for society. There is less crime in society now. So he's bought into it, but he doesn't have, maybe he even thinks deep down that he doesn't have the courage to purge. But the conceit of purging, and now that he's economically prosperous because of purging and he's selling security systems, but that does allow the fact that he doesn't purge, and he's not this wholehearted, steadfast, like one must purge to be a better society, but he believes in it more of general terms, I think opens up the opportunity, as you asked, which is a great question, for his children to have different views on it.
Yeah, I love that element of it.
Yeah, I think I'm happy you picked up on it. So I think when the new generation, I even see it now. I see some people, even with climate, my new movie, The Metaphor, is climate change, the one I did with Pete Davidson. But you see the different generational views on climate change. I know old people don't believe it's happening at all. And then as we get younger, we hear more about it, we learn about it. So generationally, I think views are more open to the youth. I think people, and I think the kids represent, especially the Max Burkholder character, was very... Yeah.
Well, bringing him up, here's another thing I've been wondering, because the surviving Sandins do not return in the franchise. What do you think the future holds for the three of them? How did that Purge Night experience kind of put them maybe on a different path than they were prior?
Absolutely. I think, I always wanted to follow them up. And listen, if the strike ends and we get a chance, there is talk of doing a kind of an interesting take on a TV show where I would be able to do that, because we'd be able to explore very intimate purge stories, but I don't know if that's true, but I hope. I think they move away. I always say they would do what I did. I think a family that experiences that much trauma and loss on that night. And Lena's character, I always thought, was way more than James. The Lena Headey character was questioning the purge deep in a way that he wasn't. He was just accepting the financial rewards of selling security systems. And she was more like, Lena always said she wanted to play it like she was dead inside, that the mere fact that the purge existed had killed her soul. So she kind of wanted to play it. I think she plays it beautifully. She's constantly kind of looking at her reflections and contemplating quietly what this all means. So I think if you experience that level of trauma, you exit pretty quickly the country. I don't think you can buy into a government system. that sanctions this. So I think I always wanted to follow the Sandins on their journey to another country, which I thought would be. But then that country, maybe starts purging too, and the cycle of crap continues in the world.
I do have many a worldwide question about how the purge changes everything everywhere. Yes. But going back to the house idea, this is another thing that I've thought too much about. Like, doesn't the purge cause a major housing crisis? Like, every single person that experiences the horrors of the purge in their own home and survives, don't they then want to get rid of that home? And is that home harder to sell because murder happened in it?
It either makes it, in this crazy world, I was thinking the same thing. Like, what would happen to the homes where murder happened? Would that become a benefit? Purging happened here. This is a house that has supported the purge. So you get your hardcore believers who think that, well, that's a house, that's a patriotic home. It supported the system. Or it's the opposite. You get more of an open-minded person who's anti-purge would find that to be the most grotesque home in the world. Whereas, I grew up, I was obsessed with the Manson murders as a child, not in a good way. I just was so terrified of them. And I really became obsessed where I really studied them and whatnot. And I used to drive by the homes in LA whenever I would visit. But I met people in those journeys who were driving by the homes because they wanted to buy the homes. Now, I could never live in one of the homes where the LaBianca or the Tate murders occurred, but there were people who thought it would have been very cool and interesting, and the ghosts of the past might be inhabiting this space. So you always have the two ends of the spectrum on housing markets and what it all means. But it could go the other way, where a house that has purging would be a big sale on the marketplace, maybe. I could
see both being a possibility.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. I warned you this up top. I've got some very, very specific questions from someone who's watched these movies too much. I hope I can explain all this properly. I have a timeline question for you.
Oh,
so
this is hard.
the sixth purge, it happens in 2023. I believe that's the one that happens in Anarchy. So that would make the first official nationwide purge in 2018. Right. But in the first movie, I believe there's footage of purging happening in both 2018 and 2017. And 2017's footage is in Staten Island. So if the first purge, the experiment, happened in 2016, what happened in 2017? Was that a nationwide experiment before the event officially kicked off?
I think you're right. I think, listen, the timeline's such a disaster because we had a lock. We couldn't go back and retroactively open up Purge 1 to change the dates when I realized, I'm all off here. I can't make this work. So yes, you're right. I always believed that the second purge would go, they went from Staten Island, which was a small borough, 7 miles wide. I think they would go to a state purge. So they'd pick a state, New York, Georgia.
I think the footage might be in New York now that you say it.
Yeah, so I think they would go, so they keep expanding it to see if they can keep selling the idea as they would at any kind of product, right? So it's the expansion, I think. But that doesn't fix. I'm the first to admit the timeline's a disaster.
Really, it's not that much of a disaster. A lot of it makes a lot of sense and does connect. I think that's the only hole that I've really been able to find.
And then when we did the TV show, I remember sitting in the writer's room and we were trying to work out the timeline. I'm like, oh, damn it, I think we're off. We were all trying to fix it and saying, okay, blah, blah, blah. But you picked it up. Yes, that's the issue.
That's what future movies are for, though.
Exactly.
I'm going to jump ahead to the Forever Purge now, because I know you initially wrote that script to be an end for the entire franchise. So at the time, why did you feel that particular story was the right place to end the entire series? And then ultimately, what changed and what is it about this idea for a sixth film that suggests that we need more purge stories, or maybe not even your idea for the sixth film, maybe even the state of the country right now that says we need more purge movies?
It's weird that you bring that up. I always say to Universal, like, you ready to do another one? I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know yet. I always say that I don't know until an idea, just comes to me. And I think what's fueled all the ideas is the social discord in the country right now, the changing political landscape has fueled me. I have very strong views. I think that the audience is picking up on, especially in 4 and 5, what my views are. I've received a lot of hate mail from one of the political parties. They kind of see what I'm saying. I think my political stance has become quite clear, I think, which has caused some, backlash from both studio and the audience. But it is definitely what you said. It's the political landscape that makes me keep wanting to purge. And I was done on 5. I thought it was a cool way to end it, where America was burning and people were retreating to Mexico as this refuge, this escape from American system that was completely broken. And then I literally woke up one day with an idea. I remember calling Sebastian. I pitched it to him. He's like, God damn it, we're back purging. He was like, he loved it, but he's like, oh, I thought we were done. I pitched it to Jason and Universal. They loved it. So I wrote 6 based on my thoughts on what's going on in the country and how can I extrapolate that and the purge metaphor and what it means to be an American at this point. So I'm psyched about 6. I think the budget, I think I could be honest here, the budget was quite large, very large. And I think Universal, the pandemic made them rethink some of the franchises on how we proceed. So I think they're still contemplating like what is the proper way to do the next Purge film. So we're kind of in this limbo state, especially with the writer's strike now too.
Well, yeah, that too.
Yeah. So, but yeah, Purge 6 is just, it's my way of looking at the country now. I think, I grew up watching Logan's Run and Soylent Green and the Mad Mag and John Carpenter and George Romero, who's the socio-political messaging was within the films. They were smuggling ideas into the film. And so for me, I was just kind of, for 6, I was extrapolating on the discord and taking it to its furthest, where as far as you can take that idea of what's going on, I feel, in the country and the political landscape. And it's a broken America. We're remapping. 6 is about the remapping of America based on ideology, sexuality and religion, so that the states are broken down. You have your black state, you have your gay state, so you have your white evangelical state, and it's really a broken country. And what's so strange is that Marjorie Taylor Greene, I'm not going to say more than her name there, recently wished for an America like that, which to me would be the most nightmarish version. It goes against everything that America stands for. I grew up in New York, so it's, the cliche of the melting pot is true. And that's how I'd like to see our country represented, by many faces and different religions and sexualities. She doesn't see it that way. So there is part of the body politic that doesn't want that. And that's what Purge 6 is. It is this kind of broken America down in this remapping. And then it picked as one state that purges still. So where it takes place. Anyway, so I don't know if I babbled on that one. But.
No, I mean, it's curious information. And I think it might answer another question I had about Purge 6. And does it take place after the events of Forever Purge, where we have a broken America? And I'm going to assume by that answer that is the case.
It does. It's at least, I think it's 15. I think I say 15. I'm not great at timelines, as you, but I think I say it's 15 years after the events of Purge 5. So we're really broken and we've remapped. Might even be 20. And then we pick up the Leo character. He's our lead again from Purge 2 and 3. Yeah.
I always love a Purge movie with Frank, but like literally anything he touches, sign me up. And his enthusiasm for everything he does, I find to be quite infectious.
Oh, it's great. He's the best to work with. No one's there for the process more. I could do every movie with Frank. So
I loved hearing that. Here's a question you might not be able to answer, especially with your approach to coming up with ideas for new Purge movies. But I mean, do you ever envision a scenario where the Purge franchise wraps up on a positive note?
Absolutely. It's so weird you bring that up. So, this is going to sound strange. It's like backwards motivation. But one of the reasons I always said, if I have a story, I'll tell it. I tell Universal. But also Sebastian and I were very aware that in the wrong hands, we always felt the Purge can turn into very exploitative. Could turn into some kind of torture porn, or without any political messaging, or so what. And in designing each of the films, I think I did this subconsciously at first, and then we started seeing the pattern of what I was doing was we try to end the films in this incredibly nihilistic concept with someone saving someone's life. So we always say, okay, let's end this, even though this is the darkest possible scenario, let's end with people, like even part 1 ends with the saving of the stranger. I think 2 ends with saving not only the father who killed Leo's child in the drunk driving accident, it ends with saving Leo by the 2 female leads. 3 ends with saving a very bad man. They don't kill the senator who's running for president, and they, the preacher, I should say, they save they decide not to kill. So there's always this decision not to kill or to save. But you're right. And we tried to do with 3, where 3 I thought was the original ending, just do a trilogy, get out, where the Elizabeth Mitchell character, she becomes president, she gets rid of the Purge, and we're now in a hopeful America where the Purge is no longer. And obviously we reversed that, and she was kicked, voted out of office, and the Purge was reinstated. But you're right. I like that you pick. I don't know if you picked them up subconsciously, but we were trying to infuse some hope in this incredibly nihilistic concept.
It's always a thread that I hold tight to when I could find. And I mean, an idea like this or a question like this is also near impossible to answer. It's a very big question too, but I think about it a lot with The Purge. And then, we also have something like The Handmaid's Tale where, they're cautionary tales. People seem to watch these things and say, that is horrific. I can't imagine that ever happening. But with both stories, and even with how films and shows tackle AI nowadays,
absolutely,
it seems like all we're doing is creeping closer to those horrific realities that are being shown on screen. And I don't quite understand why, and I don't understand what else movies and shows could be doing to maybe help that not happen.
Right. No, you're absolutely. My producer actually says that all the time. He goes, you keep predicting these terrible outcomes in America. Like Purge 5, people thought when we screened it, they thought we shot it after January 6th because it was so reminiscent of the day. We shot it a year before that. We were just holding it for COVID. And so he's like, can you just write something positive? Maybe something positive will come of what you... So I made a small film in between between The Purging and my newest film. I made a small that I always felt was the anti-Purge. It was about how movies can inspire us to do good things. Yeah, This Is the Night, about Rocky III. And so I'm always saying, okay, and I think my new one, I don't want to give away the ending, but I hope I think there's some hope infused within it. But I think you're right. It's like, how can these dystopian tales kind of end so nihilistically with no hope or just constant dread? But I've tried to fight that a little bit with even in 6, I think it ends with some hope in a maybe a more positive path that we can all go on as a country.
That will be,
that would be a beautiful thing. It'd be a miracle at this point.
I'd be holding tight to that little bit of hope when we get it. Before, I do have a question or two about The Home, but before I get there, I wanted to circle back to the potential TV show that could come out of this. You already mentioned that it was that it could be an opportunity to explore more intimate stories. Is that also an opportunity? I might have misheard before, but is that also an opportunity to potentially bring in the surviving Sandins, or would it focus
Absolutely.
on? Okay.
That's what I was thinking, Pat. I think it would be a great way. I can't give away the conceit, but it opens it up in a way. The canvas would be, we can pay attention to a lot of people, but even the movies always have to be, as you know, the summer release is July 4th. They have this kind of momentum, like a punch in the face. So the nuances, I always say I'm not the most nuanced filmmaker in the Purge world because we're kind of just really slamming both the messaging and the story points home in that 95 minutes we have. I think the beauty of TV, what I'm learning, because I'm definitely more of a film guy, but what I'm learning about TV and watching TV and learning more about it is the real estate just allows you to dive deeper into things that you can never do in a movie. Take your time, really explain why someone would pick up a gun on that night, what drives them to this decision in a way that I really can't do in the film. So I think it would be great. We can get in, and we can get into more detailed things of what happened to the Sandin family. Even other characters throughout that people have fallen in love with. We can get into that. I think the conceit of the show, if it happens, will allow entry into smaller films and revisiting characters too.
I will say when it happens, because I am hopeful that all of this stuff will work out in a way that favors what people should have been getting all along. And then we will get many more Purge movies and TV shows. I like to speak things into existence, so I needed to say that out loud.
He's going to will it to happen, as I say. He's going to keep saying it. Yeah.
But you do have one movie in the can, the one you worked on with Pete Davidson, The Home. So because of how The Purge came to be, I was wondering what in particular inspired that story idea. Was it another personal thing you were experiencing that you wanted to explore via film?
Yeah, it was. So I wrote that with a buddy, actually, a local cop who was my best friend. We were sitting during COVID in my backyard. It's his family and my family were in, as we used to call, the bubble. His 2 boys played with my daughter a lot in the backyard. So it was the only other family we saw. And we would just we were talking about, and without saying too much, I don't want to give away my metaphors and my pretentious part of my writing process, because I think it exists unto itself as a genre, a psychological horror film. I think one of my favorite films is Rosemary's Baby. That's Rosemary's Baby kind of film without the devil worship. But there was, I wanted to explore in the horror genre, because I think horror, sci-fi, and action are great ways to metaphorically explore without proselytizing. Although I think in The Purge, I started to proselytize a little bit in 4 and 5. But I don't think an audience wants to feel that preached to. So I think, Scorsese years ago spoke about something called smuggler's cinema in the 40s and 50s. The directors who were under contract with the studios were getting very sick of making cowboy movies and war movies. So they started smuggling some socio-political commentary into the films in a very subtle way so the studios wouldn't get mad at them. But I always thought that was an incredibly cool concept. And we saw that with George Romero and one of my favorite filmmakers, John Carpenter. You just start smuggling these ideas in. We did it with The Purge. So the idea of working, I was trying to how do I work climate change and global warming into a kind of metaphorical horror exercise? And we came up with this crazy idea. I think it's crazy. My buddy and I, that we feel somewhat of a metaphor for this crazy time we're in with global warming. And I think we'll see if people see it. That's the other, sometimes you do these things and you want to, people, and I'll say this during the test screenings, a good portion of the audience saw the messaging or saw the thematics underneath the horror, the genre elements. So, I'm talking very abstractly without giving it. So I should stop the abstract talk. I know it can become boring.
I'll dare to ask one more question about the story. So you're bringing up the environmental aspect of it, and then it also involves a nursing home.
Well, that's the thing. Yes. So that's why it's much more subtle than the Purge's messaging in that, yes, it takes place where, so you're dealing with Pete Davidson playing a very dramatic role. I think that's what's kind of cool for people to see. It's not the Pete we've become accustomed to at all. And he's wonderful. He's a wonderful dramatic actor, which was even surprising to me on set. I would say, how did you learn to do this, Pete? Quite often. But he just has this natural instinct and he went with it. And he did not rely on the comedy at all because there's none in the movie. So not to give again too much away, but it's about him. He's a graffiti artist. He gets in trouble with the law, and his community service, instead of doing jail time, is he has to live and become the new super at a retirement old age home. So it's about, older generations dealing with the youth in America. And obviously then it kicks into heavy horror and some crazy, mythology about what these people are and who they are and what they're doing in this home and how that affects the youth of America. So I think the metaphor is there for people who, I always think I think in the smuggler cinema realm, again, you don't want to hit people with a hammer. So the people who want to see the messaging or the thematics, the sub-thematics, I think it'll be there for them to say, oh, I see what is being said about global warming. But for other people, they'll just be like, I don't care about that at all. I just want to watch a horror movie. So
you have thoroughly piqued my interest, so I'm not going to bother you with any more story questions. But one more question about it, just in terms of the timeline here. When can we expect to see it? Do you have any ballpark?
I literally, no joke, finished it 4 days ago, right before the break.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
The final mix was finally done. It took a little extra because we had to wait. We did one additional day shooting, and Pete's TV show, Bupkis, we had to wait about 4 months because of a hair continuity problem we were dealing with. So we had to wait for him to finish before we could do that. So that slowed things down. But we finally finished, which is great. I feel great about it. I don't know. So it's my first time I'm working with Miramax is a financier, not a distributor, so I have to sell it. So I'm going to wait on Bill Block, who's wonderful, the head of Miramax. He's going to now, I think, I hand it off to him and see. So I can't, this is such a new world to me, the selling of a film like this, that I don't know if it takes a week or a year. I have literally no idea. So as soon as I find something out, I'll shoot you a text. I'll tell you what's going on.
I like the sound of that. I eagerly await that text. I will send lots of good vibes your way for that movie, for the future of the Purge franchise. And in the meantime, I will continue watching and rewatching the movies and the show we already have. James, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. You're the best. Thank you.
Congrats on everything.
Thank you.